Welcome to MRE Uncut, where we'll give you real and practical insights into the real estate scene in Melbourne. We'll discuss what's happening in the industry, all backed by MRE's history of over 30 years in the game. With that said, let's jump into this week's episode of MRE Uncut.
Welcome back to another edition of MRE Uncut. My name's Steve Fitzsimon and I am joined by Tilly Gillan, who is our Head of Property Services at MRE.
Hello, everybody.
And then we have Jarrod Smooth O'Donnell.
Thank you.
Carlton fan and head of our leasing / livability team. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Steve-o. Great to be here.
Yeah. So there's a bit of banter around the office about names at the moment, so we'll just run with those. Now, today we wanted to talk about preparation for the peak season and understanding more about that, getting in a little bit more dirty detail with our stats master, Jarrod, and also understanding it from both a tenant and a landlord perspective. Let's look at peak season. Jarrod, tell us, what is peak season? How do you know it's peak season? Why do we talk about peak season in Melbourne?
It's the cycle of rental life. It goes around and around. Summer hits and we usually have this massive influx of migration to the city, particularly with the sort of stock that we deal with closer to the city, people moving for study or moving for work or moving for lifestyle change, as opposed to the other end of the spectrum in the middle of winter when not many people are arriving in the city. So we get this big boiling pot of a lot of properties being available, a lot of properties being rented, a lot of demand, and a pretty decent increase in rents.
So if we look at it from a statistical model, does it increase by 20%, 30%, the level of inquiry?
It's funny that you ask because I actually checked this before we came in here.
I told you the stats guru.
So I like the stat of it's a new one for me. It's a very simple one, but inquiries per days listed. It's a very simple stat. It's the amount of traction that any of our listings are getting on any given day.
Yep.
And from winter in 23 to summer of 24, so that just gone, double. Well, I did it 94% of an increase.
So a 94% increase of inquiry per day per property.
Yep.
So it's not 10 or 20 or 30, it's 94.
It's a double.
That's significant. And then you were saying also that rents increase.
Yep. Typically winter to summer and years gone by, we'd expect like a 10% sort of situation.
10%, so 600 to 660.
Spot on. A bit of that's probably been lost in the wash of COVID recovery while things have been getting back a little bit. And we had some really large increases last year. Probably won't go that large this year, but 10% is a pretty safe bet, particularly with our inner city stock.
So I listened to Jarrod, Tilly, and I sit there and I say, you've got a bit of experience working in other real estate agents outside of MRE. Jarrod and I are sort of more MRE for recent history.
Yep.
How many agencies out there are talking like Jarrod talks about?
None. Put it simply, none. Never heard it before coming to MRE, and I think that's one of the things that MRE is so valuable for in terms of from our clients, because having that insight, it's one thing to have the insight, but it's another thing to actually pay attention to it and act on it. Because I think a lot of other agencies, they probably have the data, but what they do about it is not much. They're not approaching peak season with a different approach to how they may approach it mid-year. Increasing rents, looking at how they cycle through with their inspections and priorities and whatnot. So I think that's the difference here, is how you approach that, using that data for how you approach your campaigns going into peak season to get the best results.
Like, I knew your answer before I asked it, as you could expect, but the reality is this is where the devil is in the detail when it comes to choosing a property manager, one that has that exposure to that amount of stats that can then leverage from that knowledge to be able to drive a better outcome for the owner.
Definitely.
Jarrod, in your update this week, you were talking about 15-month leases, which I think is a fascinating thought process. Tilly, can you go into a little bit more around why Jarrod was talking about 15-month leases and how you and your property services team, and that's the property management team for people who got a bit lost there, in terms of how you apply the learning into the day-to-day work with the clients that you have?
Yeah, of course. So if we look now, we're sort of nearly mid-November, coming into December. It's a weaker time of the market, if you could put it that way, compared to, say, mid-Jan, Feb, March. That's where we when we talk about peak season, that's really
the
sort of
98% increase or
the
whatever
increase.
it was.
Yeah, that's the time frame we're looking at. So the goal there is to ensure that you have leases expiring within that period. If you were to have a tenancy sign on for 12 months now, they're expecting to give their notice to vacate if they want it at the end of their lease, sort of roughly this time, if not a month earlier next year.
Yep.
Coming into Christmas and whatnot, you lose time over that campaign. It slows down. People have commitments. People go away. Offices are closed, for example.
Yep.
So having those leases slightly longer and finishing in those peak times to then be able to re-advertise in a peak market where we see increases of above 50%, in some cases 94% to be precise, double the rents. Higher inquiry levels, more people looking, it just becomes a much better outcome for our clients, higher rentals.
So you're saying get a tenant now, sign them up on a 15-month lease, get them out of the Christmas cycle, avoid the hassle of closures over Christmas, and get them into the peak cycle.
Absolutely. And then have that cycle run moving thereon, moving forward.
Yeah, because then you do 12 months leases
Correct,
after that.
yeah.
What do you say to the owner that says, oh, hang on though, rents are increasing, and if you sign me up for a 15-month lease, I don't get a rent increase until 15 months in?
Yeah, look, and we hear that a lot, and I think it's around the education piece of the why you would do that. So in having a tenant sign up now for 12 months, the difference in rent per week that you could receive now compared to mid-Jan, Feb, March is significantly higher. So if we look
10%.
at that 10% increase, you can make that up from having a slightly longer term lease, holding off increasing the rent for, say, 2 months. You'll make that back in the increased rent that you'll achieve during that period, leasing it at a higher
and
rate.
then you're going to have the same impact again the year after.
And the year after, and hopefully the year after and year after.
And that'd be when you do your lease renewals or your rent reviews are going to be back in the peak season again.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's just maths, isn't it?
Well, it is, but you've got to apply it to your workplace.
And that goes back to what you were saying before. It's all about understanding the data you have and being smart with it. It's one thing to know you have an increase, but if you're just going to let it go and not put in tactics like we have here with longer term leases, it's kind of no point even looking at the data.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing anything with it.
Yeah, and if you're not exposed to it because you're a smaller agency, you might not have the volume or the experience within the team to be able to look at it, then you start to see the benefits of working with somebody who has more exposure. I want to talk a little bit about the double level of importance now when it comes to rent reviews and being in peak season. Because traditionally, before 2020 and the new government legislation that we love so much, we're really close to it. It's an emotional bond that we have. Before then, you could increase the rent and you could just increase it, and you would increase it to what was defined by yourself as the market rent for the property.
Yep.
You wouldn't have to provide any comparables. You would just be going, okay, it used to be $550. I reckon we could rent it now for $600. You'd issue them with 60 days notice, and if they wanted to, they could object, and they'd have a couple of local agents come out and have a look at the property. And if they thought, yeah, it's worth $600, then you're pretty stuffed as a tenant.
Yep.
That meant that if you're a high-performing agent and you believed that the data was right, that you could make an argument for that case. And if other high-performing agents went out to have a look at it, then you could justify your case. What's the circumstance now for owners who are looking to implement a rent increase?
Yeah, so look, it's actually funny. I remember years ago when I started, it was you could increase them every 6 months, and pretty much like what you said, it was just whatever you feel is reasonable, go with it. With new legislation, it's changed significantly. You can now only increase it every 12 months, so that's the first point. But also it's about how you can increase that rent, and this is the biggest struggle, I guess, that we see at MRE because our rents are generally a lot higher than our competitors. When you're issuing a rent increase, you have to provide comparables within the current market. they're very strict about what those comparables are. So you can't compare something that you're leasing or reviewing, for example, now to what was leasing 12 months ago. It has to be a recent letting, either leased or currently on the market for lease. So it's reflective of the current market, which is a challenge as well, because if you're reviewing leases now that expire in, say, March, where we're having a peak period where we're expecting to have a peak period and rise in rents, it's not so comparable. So there are different little tactics that you can use, and really you want to be encouraging owners to hold off until those peak periods to really review it, considering that VCAT and the government legislation is so tight on the types of comparables that you can use, to the point where, for example, if your property doesn't have a balcony and one of your comparables has a balcony, they'll strike it out. So it's very specific about being like for like. So 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1 car with exact 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1 car. If it's got an island bench, you have to compare it with an island bench. If it's got an aircon, you have to compare it with an aircon. If it's got building facilities, that's a big one that a lot of clients may get confused about, because albeit that the properties may look very similar, if one building has a pool, a gym, a sauna, and X amount of facilities that are available to those residents, it significantly impacts the price as well. So it's changed a lot. The legislation has changed a lot. The government are really, really tight on it. So making sure that when you're increasing rents, you have to be so vigilant in making sure that they are like for like. And that's a challenge, because we've come from a space where you can just sort of put it up as much as you like because you can probably get that result, to now being really held back to where the rest of the market's at, being safe, as we would say, probably with their campaigns, which really brings down our ability to get really high above market results.
Yeah, so effectively, when it comes to a rent review, you're held to the lowest performing agent's benchmark.
Yeah, essentially, absolutely.
In a building, as opposed to being able to perceive what you might have achieved for a property 9 months ago as being the market because you had a better marketing campaign. If somebody else hasn't been able to achieve that since then, well, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to increase the rent to where you were 9 months ago, or what you feel is the market. It's up to what the other agents thought was the market.
That's absolutely it. And the amount of, agents, and not to diss anyone, but they sort of their preferences and their priorities can be quite different. So you have an approach where you just want to get at least as quickly as you can at a low price, compared to an agent that really wants to get the highest value for their clients. And albeit that you might have an extra week in between, having that difference in rent for an increase really makes a world of difference for clients, if it can mean that they're pretty much their whole management fees are wiped for a year, given that they've got such a higher rent. And that's the challenge we see at the moment, is not being able to do that.
So it's sort of a double reason why you can do it. Do you believe that leases should be more than 15 months? Like if you're in July, for example, should you be looking at an 18 or 20-month lease in July to get it onto cycle, if you can do that with a tenant? Or where do you sort of draw the line?
Yeah, look, I think, yes, in short, I would probably say yes. Ideally the goal is you always want to have your leases expiring in peak period.
Right.
Just because of the increase in, as we saw, in 10%, and also renter activity in that time as well. It is
so
significantly
better quality renters because there's more renter activity.
Absolutely. And look, that's not to say mid-year it's just empty and it's done and there's no movement or there's no increases at all. It's not to say that. It's just the difference in price and traction during those periods are significantly different.
Yeah.
So in short, yes, but I guess as well it's sort of case by case. You wouldn't go shorter. I wouldn't go shorter just because you're then held by the fact you can only increase rents every 12 months.
Right. So if you did like a 7-month lease or something to get it into January, you can't increase the rent anyhow.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. So even if you renew a lease, for example, you still can't increase that. So you're held by that, and then you fall into another 12-month cycle. So you're going from 15, 16 months to 24 months, if not longer.
And then, so Jarrod, let's look at owners now. Like you were coming to the end of the year, right? My concern at this time is that you don't want your property vacant over the Christmas break. So if you've got a vacant property today, what level or what action should you take to make sure that you've got a tenant? How far? What should you change? Should you drop the rent significantly? If so, by how much? What do you need to do to make sure that you tenant the property before Christmas? And if you don't tenant it before Christmas, what's the consequence?
High action, high urgency. I've been going around the office last week and I've been trying to spruik a bit of fear because people lose track of it every year and Christmas always comes around a bit quicker. And most real estate agencies, they'll close for a couple of weeks and people think like, oh, if my property sits vacant over a Christmas period, like a week and a half, 2 weeks, like, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. But what we're trying to talk about is that it's not a week and a half, it's not 2 weeks. By the time people actually come back from their Christmas breaks, by the time we can actually get prospective renters through our inspections, by the time those people actually decide to put in an application and actually commence a lease, we're not talking 1.5 weeks. We're talking 3.5, 4 weeks, and that's in a best case scenario. So if we're here at the start of December and you've got a vacant property and you're not getting much traction, significantly dropping that rent to lease before Christmas, not just lease, but have tenants moving in before Christmas, absolutely. Like, we don't want to cut it so down so far, but I'd be making significant action, signing up that new tenant on a 14, 15-month lease so that if they do decide to vacate next time around, they're going to be vacating on the good side of Christmas. Just getting back in the cycle.
So if you look at that from a renter's perspective, is now a good time to be throwing around offers?
Absolutely. Always, if that's what you want to do, people can always put in offers, but there's two sides to the coin. And if you see an opening and you think there's a gap there, by all means, go for it. We're always going to present an offer to the owner. Obviously, if it's a bit below, you're probably significantly less likely to get where you want to get, but there's every chance.
Yeah, okay. So we've got a market that now is the time to make changes to avoid that vacancy because it's not a week and a half, it's 4 weeks or more that you could be sitting there effectively vacant, because if it's vacant in the middle of December, it's unlikely to be tenanted, like to have tenants secured until the middle of January. They maybe might not move in until the end of January. So there's 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it can be brutal. But then once you've got them in, if you can get them in on this side and get the 15-month lease, well, then happy days, you're onto the cycle. So the cycle is important because obviously we're seeing those higher rents and the rest of it. If you look at the way that we approach pricing and marketing for that cycle, could I increase my rent if I don't rent it this side of Christmas?
I mean, you could.
But do you think it would work? If I drop my rent now and I don't lease it, do I increase it after Christmas?
The bounce back after Christmas break, it usually does take a few weeks for us to really get into it. People don't just click their fingers and magically arrive in the new year. It's kind of drips in to the start of February.
Right.
Which, again, if you're renting out your property at the start of February, you're not going to get new tenants until mid-February.
Yeah. So it just keeps pushing it out by those 2 weeks or so all the time. So lease it regardless, just get it done, but at least you're getting on the cycle.
Spot on.
So if you lease it in early Jan, then you want to have, a 13-month lease or a 14-month lease so that you don't have them vacating again over Christmas.
Spot on.
Yeah, okay. So that makes sense. So if we look now in terms of the owners that are out there, can they prepare for this in any unique way? Like we've got, this is the nature of the setup. Can you market in a different way, or should they prepare their marketing in January or February in a different way?
Look, I think it's the marketing strategy we use. I mean, we of course want to adapt to what the owner's needs are, but in a holistic approach, we sort of approach it in the same way that we try to. 30 days campaign is what you're looking at. So it comes down back to what Jarrod was saying is you just got to be smart and quick with listening to the market, making adjustments on price where you can and when you need. But if you're a new owner coming into the rental market, you probably want to approach it come mid-Jan rather than pre-Christmas. So apologies. And all for the reasons that Jarrod came back to is even mid-Jan, you then come to the end of Jan, we've got Australia Day, so that people go away for that. Yep. That sort of extends it out as well. So from an owner's point of view, if you're not in a position where you need to lease it right now, hold off, wait till mid-Feb, and you're going to have a much higher chance of getting a better renter at a higher price.
Yeah, okay. So essentially, the peak is gold in terms of where you want to be. Do everything that you can, and if you've got the opportunity, just start then.
Absolutely,
and then that's going to deliver. But if you don't have the opportunity, we'll rent it now and get it on cycle in the future.
That's it. You just do a longer term lease now.
Yeah.
To put it back in
but
cycle.
Are tenants open to the longer term leases?
Look, they are. I think they are. I mean, not everyone, obviously, but they also see it a bit of a benefit for themselves. They know they're not going to get an increase in their rent for a longer period of time. So for them, it's a win as well. They've got more security. You see all over the news at the moment how there's a crisis and whatnot. So tenants are quite receptive to it, unless they've got a specific circumstance, if they need to be out after 12 months or whatever that may be. But most of the time, we haven't had much pushback at all from renters.
Yeah, and so in terms of the tenant side of things, so you don't get much pushback from them, but the government's changed the way that you can hold inspections now with the new legislation. Can you go into a little bit of detail about how that's evolved since the 2021 change of legislation?
Absolutely. So we used to be able to advertise pretty much 4 weeks prior to their end of lease date. Now it's gone back to 14 days if they do really push back. So not being able to access the property within the final 14 days. 21 days, sorry. 21 days,
yeah.
sorry. Was 14, now 21 days, sorry. So that makes a big challenge because you lose pretty much up to a week, if not more, depending on when they give that notice.
Yeah.
And also the frequency of inspections per week. So having 2 inspections per week for tenanted properties.
Yeah.
You used to see a lot of agencies that might hold 50 inspections a week if they wanted.
Right.
But it's really now about making sure you have inspections at those prime times, so you're getting the highest traction from prospective renters, i.e. middle of the day or end of the day, lunch breaks and after work.
Yeah.
But significantly more difficult now, only being able to go in after that 21 or within 21 days left on their lease.
Yeah, okay. So, Jarrod, how do you approach that in terms of the setup? If you've got this opportunity, they've given notice, what's the way that the team look at trying to show the property during that period?
It's a simple science, really. If we want to achieve the best results for our clients, we need to show the properties at the best time. So we've got our large leasing team, which service us very well. But we've restructured the way that we set up their workloads and everything that they do so that we've got as much availability to show properties in that 5 o'clock onwards time slot for our prospective renters. In a perfect world with the current legislation, 21 days to tenancy, we can start showing the property. We can do it twice a week. It's 6 inspections for us to achieve what the landlord needs to achieve and do it well. We've changed almost everything to make sure that we maximise on every one of those 6 possible inspections.
Yeah, so it's not just holding those inspections, but holding them at times where they're going to be most effective.
Yeah, 2:20 on a Thursday doesn't really do many people favours.
Yeah, well, not if you're looking for a professional tenant that's working at that time. So it sort of creates a challenge, but equally so for agents because they need to resource more people at the peak times to be able to open those properties. So I guess that brings the challenges for lesser resourced agencies in terms of being able to show their properties at those times.
Yeah, unless they want to make their property managers all work crazy overtime.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the current vibe for property managers working overtime is not a strong one. So
Tilly might pick them up if they do that to them.
Yeah. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. So, in terms of that, like you took the approach of shifting the working hours of your staff to starting later and finishing later to allow for the inspections to take place during those peak times. Has that proven successful?
Yeah, absolutely. We get significantly better traction after 5 o'clock, particularly on non-CBD or close to CBD stuff, which is the vast majority of what we do have in the inner suburbs. The composition of their days, getting our juniors, our leasing staff to complete, other admin sort of roles during the day when we wouldn't have many people showing up to those inspections, just locking and loading them for that 5 o'clock onwards all the way up to 6:30.
Yeah.
Works well.
Nice. Okay, so we've got essentially peak time, significant increases in rent, significant increases in demand. If your property's not on peak, get it on peak. Do pretty much what you can, even if you have to leave the rent stable for 18 months, do it to get it on a peak and you won't look back. But if you're on peak, you've still got to open them at the right time. You've still got to get people through. You've still got to be able to check the apps, process those things, do all the rest of it to be able to achieve the ultimate outcome for the clients.
Absolutely.
Finding every little gain we can find anywhere we can find it.
Yeah. And exposure to, how many are leasing a year now?
This year last year was 1,600.
1,600, yeah.
1,550.
Yeah.
We should clip 1,650, 17.
Okay.
Remains to be seen. We've got another month to go.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, brilliant. Jarrod, thanks for coming in. Tilly, amazing to see you again.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Steve.